There's a word you've probably heard 1,000 times in church, and every time it's used, it sounds like a compliment. But I'm going to say something that might get me excommunicated from a theology conference. I think omnipotent is a bad word. Not bad like swearing, bad like misleading, corrupting, theologically infected. And maybe, just maybe, it's wrecked more of our image of God than we realize. So today, let's ask the question, what if calling God omnipotent is part of the problem? I'm Theology Jack, your guide in exploring life's biggest questions and mysteries. Now, let's not get too precious with our language. Words are tools, and sometimes the tools we use shape the entire house we build. So when we use words like omnipotent, we're not just describing God, we're describing what kind of God we're dealing with. Omnipotent, all-powerful, unlimited power, zero restrictions, ultimate control. Sounds impressive, right? Also sounds terrifying because power, as we've experienced it, isn't neutral. It tends to break things and people and eventually itself. We all know this. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So why does omnipotent get a free pass? If I told you someone was all-powerful with no qualifiers, no checks, no limits, would you feel safe? Or would you feel like maybe you're about to be in a Marvel villain origin story? See, omnipotent was never in the Bible, not once. It's not Hebrew, it's not Greek, it's Latin, medieval theology fan fiction. It didn't show up in Christian doctrine until long after Jesus was gone and empire theology started rewriting God in the image of Caesar. And we've been living with that rebrand ever since. We took the God who kneels to wash feet and gave him a scepter. We took the Jesus who dies with his arms open and turned him into a cosmic puppet master. We said, God is love. And then we added a footnote. But he also might micromanage your life and condemn half the planet to eternal conscious torment because omnipotence. So here's the thing. If omnipotence means God can stop evil but doesn't, then God's either cruel or incompetent. And if God can't stop evil because love won't allow coercion, now we're talking a different kind of power. Relational power, vulnerable power, power that doesn't override but invites. That kind of power doesn't fit inside omnipotent. It's more like lovingly potent, responsively powerful, creatively tenacious, but not omnipotent, not in the way we usually mean it. And yeah, I know. Some theologians try to redefine it. Omnipotence doesn't mean God can do anything. It means God can do anything logically possible. Cool. But that's not what most people hear. What they hear is God could have stopped the abuse, could have healed the cancer, could have saved the child, but chose not to. That's not love. That's trauma dressed in theology. And here's the kicker. The Bible never says God is omnipotent. It says God is love, which should tell us something about priorities. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul describes what love is, and there's not a single line about control. Love is patient. Love is kind, not envious, not boastful, doesn't insist on its own way. Love bears, believes, hopes, endures. So if God is love, then God isn't insisting on God's own way. Which again wrecks our obsession with omnipotence. because the God who doesn't insist is not the God of empire. That's the God of invitation. Let's get brutally honest. Omnipotent is a word that makes God sound suspiciously like a dictator. It's theological Stockholm syndrome. We've been taught to worship control, then told God is the ultimate controller. And then we wonder why people leave the church. They're not leaving Jesus, they're leaving Zeus in a Jesus costume, because that kind of God makes everything a test, makes suffering a lesson, makes tragedy part of the plan. That's not hope, that's gaslighting. But what if power looks different? What if the strongest thing in the universe is not the ability to force your way, but to stay when it hurts, to love when you're ignored, to forgive when you're rejected, to wait when you could walk away? That's the power of God, not omnipotence, open-heartedness. And yeah, it's not as flashy. Doesn't look good on a church billboard, but it saves people in a way no lightning bolt ever could. Take Jesus, the ultimate revelation of God, right? If omnipotent was the point, the crucifixion makes zero sense. He didn't fight back, didn't summon angels, didn't turn the cross into a throne. He died willingly, quietly, publicly. And that's how love wins. It doesn't overpower, it outlasts. Which leads us to a better question than, is God omnipotent? How about, what kind of power does love require? Because if your theology says God is love, but acts more like a tyrant, then maybe love needs a new marketing team. And maybe omnipotence needs to go. Because here's what it does to us. If God is all powerful in the empire sense, then suffering must be part of the script, which means we start spiritualizing tragedy. Your chronic illness, a test. Your infertility, it's a lesson. Your child's death, a mysterious divine purpose. We start gaslighting our own souls because we're trying to make omnipotence fit where love belongs. But if God's power is love-shaped, then tragedy isn't a message from the throne, it's a cry heard from the cross. Then your pain doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be companioned. Then prayer isn't about convincing God to intervene. It's about inviting God to co-create new possibilities in a world that's still unfolding. That kind of power is relational, participatory, free. And yeah, it means God doesn't always get what God wants. And maybe that's the point, because if love is real, then consent matters. Then freedom is sacred. Then control is off the table. That's not weakness. That's holy restraint. God's power in that view isn't omnipotent. It's infinitely invitational. So what do we do with the word? Honestly, maybe we retire it. Not because God isn't powerful, but because that word has too much theological baggage. It's used to prop up dictatorships, to justify abuse, to shame victims. We need a new vocabulary, one that doesn't worship control. Maybe instead of omnipotent, we say, God is endlessly capable of love. God is infinitely committed to the good. God is eternally co-creative with the world. That doesn't make for a great hymn lyric, I admit. But it might save someone from giving up on God altogether, because people can't worship a God they don't trust, and no one trusts a tyrant. So here's to the God who doesn't control everything, who doesn't override your will, who doesn't need omnipotence to be divine, who's powerful enough to be present, vulnerable enough to be with us, and loving enough to refuse to dominate. That's the kind of God I can follow. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading everything and might even include your ideas in a future video. And a quick reminder, click like just to be cool. And hey, if this is your kind of stuff, hit subscribe for more. It helps so much. So let's map ideas that can change the world together. And thanks for watching till the end, fellow explorers. Stay curious and embrace the mystery. This is Theology Jack, signing off.